won Florida by a wide margin, had the votes been counted. And it's an interesting instance of the corruption of American journalism that a consortium of American newspapers actually did the counting following the election and then misidentified the results. If you read the headlines of their reports, you learned that their study had shown, after all, that Bush was rightfully elected. If you read the article, you learned the opposite. Now, in 2004, Bush, not having been elected to begin with, was very certainly not re-elected. And there's very good evidence by a multitude of university scholars and citizen activists, statisticians. There's a vast volume of research to show that. And I think it's worth adding that there's also, I think, significant body of evidence to suggest that the reduced level of corruption in the 2008 election is very largely due to the presence of, the very active presence of citizen activists and scholars intervening in the period prior to that election. Karl Rove, a month before the election, was confidently predicting victories in some 10 swing states. Immediately before the election, he was conceding defeat, not particularly because the polls had changed, but because a man named Connell, who had been one of his major computer fraud experts, was up before a court, dragged there by Ohio lawyers and citizen activists, and Rove was simply not able to do what he very clearly wanted to do. So I think we owe, in part, we owe the fact that whatever the consequences are going to be of Obama's election to the activism of hundreds and thousands of American citizens determined to recover their democracy. I said we need to redefine this phrase, war on terror. War always involves terror. And what we're looking at, I think, might more aptly be described, and I'm thinking here of an article in the current issue of Harper's by the very noted human rights lawyer Scott Horton, as a war against legality. A war against legality, making use of all of the weapons of terror. I want, though, at least to touch on a number of different issues. One of them, Canada's participation in the occupation of Afghanistan. I want to talk briefly about the degradation of civil rights in this country. I want to say something about security certificates. I want to say something about the corruption of our immigration review boards, with particular reference to a current case in Montreal, that of an unfortunate American would-be immigrant to this country named Karl Malaskiewicz Blaze. I want to say something about renditions to torture. I don't think I need to talk in any detail about the case of Meher Arar, but some of you may not be aware that there is a recent excellent book by the Ottawa human rights activist and journalist Kelly Wither, which deals with several parallel cases of Muhammad El-Mati, Abdullah Al-Malki, Moyed Nureddin, who suffered exactly the same fate, or I mean, just a fate parallel to that of Meher Arar. They were identified on the most absurd kind of, I mean, you know how you can play that game? What do you call it? Where you try and establish by how many handshakes you are connected to, let's say, Osama bin Laden.
6 degrees.
6 degrees. I can get to Osama bin Laden with 2 handshakes, by the way. Doesn't mean I've ever met the guy or care to. You know, you can get to the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche in no time at all. That one I think takes me about 5 handshakes, believe it or not. You know, Virginia Woolf, the Queen Elizabeth. I'm 1 handshake away from Queen Elizabeth II, and so on. Right? It's that kind of thinking that led to the accusations against these people, to their rendition or their kidnapping with information supplied by the Canadian security forces to foreign countries which we knew were going to torture them. And in all of these cases, the torturers were acting on information supplied to them by the Canadian intelligence agencies. So this is one of the shameful facts of Canada's participation in this war on terror. Another one, of course, just since I'm talking about these issues now, is of course the case of Omar Khadr, who in 2003 was interviewed in Guantanamo, to his initial great joy, by a little group of Canadians. And he came to understand that they were interrogating him. And they were part of the system under which he was suffering. The reports by the Canadians indicate some degree of mockery of the fact that, he pulled his T-shirt off and said, look at my injuries, my eye, I'm blinded and so on. And they thought, oh, he's trained by Al-Qaeda to say these things. If you read the full documents, you learn that on the following day, his American interrogator observed that one of his bullet wounds was bleeding and sent him off for medical treatment. You learn that he did indeed lose most of the sight of one eye as a result of the original action in which he was captured. Now, what we have there is beyond shame, it's open illegality. We have the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade, one of whose officers participated in this interrogation, and we have, I'm not sure whether they were CSIS or RCMP agents, I don't have the documents with me, but we have Canadian Intelligence Service agents flagrantly violating international law and therefore also Canadian law. And we have a further violation by our own government in its refusal to act on the International Convention of the Rights of the Child, right? According to which you do not treat 15-year-olds who have been accused of being child warriors as war criminals. You treat them as children who need to be, if anything, rehabilitated. So there's the shameful refusal of our government to act. The Canadian government, by the way, stands alone in this. Other governments have said to the United States, politely but firmly, we want our nationals back from Guantanamo. And when the British said it, the Americans said, well, okay, you can have them. Canada has said, it's okay with us. You can put this child, as he was, on trial for his life. We don't particularly care that the evidence you have against him is very clearly, by evidence emerging out of the kangaroo court system at Guantanamo Bay, fabricated. We know that the officer who composed the initial report on the action in which an American Special Forces soldier was killed by a grenade changed the report, altering it from saying that the person who had thrown the grenade appeared to be someone who was killed in this action to saying the person who threw the grenade was this 15-year-old. So there's manifest fraud, and we have a government that is refusing to take action in defiance of Canadian law, in defiance of international law, to intercede on this person's behalf. So I want to say something about the kind of tragicomic case of a young American, Carl Molaskovitz Blaze, who was arrested in 2000 by the Secret Service. He'd had some prior troubles of various kinds, of a minor sort, brushes with the law, nothing major. But he was arrested by the Secret Service because he had been making and distributing cartoons attacking a man under the protection of the Secret Service, at this time Republican presidential hopeful George W. Bush. The cartoons, I've seen them, are rather childish. they're not skillful in any way. They're things that might have been drawn by